Welcome to Real Estate and Murder, a podcast about real estate and murder.
I am Amy Brockbank.
And I am Sarah Brager. We are both licensed real estate agents in the state of Utah who have a common fascination with true crime.
We are here to tell you stories of murder amongst the real estate community. It might be an agent, it might be a client, it might be an undetected serial killer.
When it comes to real estate crimes, some are predators and some are prey.
We just want to issue a trigger warning. The content of these cases can be difficult to hear from time to time, and please listen with care.
Hi, Amy.
Hey, Sarah.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Real Estate and Murder, the podcast.
Yeah.
This is going to be part 2 of the coverage of the story of the tragic death of beloved real estate broker Vern Holbrook.
Yes.
So we put out part 1 last week. Definitely go back and listen to it if you haven't, because we go over a lot about Vern's life. Actually, way more than we ever would have expected.
Yeah.
Because Amy connected the dots and figured out that Vern actually lived and grew up in the same town as her grandparents.
Yeah.
And knew her grandfather well.
Yeah.
I mean, just blown away. Still blown away. So Amy had a lot of insight about Vern. We talk about his life, his family, his business. And then ultimately, we get to the day of the vicious, brutal attack that ultimately Vern Holbrook dies from. And that was May 25th, 2013. So that's what we covered in part 1. Definitely go back and listen. But to take us into part 2, we're going to do everyone a favor here real quick. And we're going to go over some names that are going to be brought up in the story here.
Yeah.
And we just want to briefly go over all the characters quickly, because there are, like, all of a sudden 12, 13 characters come together. And just to make sure the storylines are told very clearly, we just have a couple notes starting with the family. Let's start with his family.
Yeah, we were just going to go over his family. We're not going to really talk about it as in depth as we did in part 1. But
Sure.
Just a reminder, Vern has 4 kids, 12 grandkids, 8 great-grandkids. And if you listen to the stories, it talks about his son Andrew and his wife Tara, and his son Chad. And Chad was married to a woman named Jill. They had been divorced.
They had 3 kids. So they were 3 of his grandkids.
3 of his grandkids come from Chad and Jill.
Yep.
He has a son, Terry, and a daughter, Jana. Jana had passed away when she was not quite 50, I believe. And so she's not shared as much in the story. And then Vern has like 3 wives throughout the story. Like, he's married 3
Not at the same time.
Yeah, no, he's not polygamous. That's not the segment. We're not doing a cult segment. But yeah, but we'll mention in this episode probably his wife, Nola, who passed away, and his current wife, Shin.
Yep.
And then we met
Adriana Mendez.
Yes.
Who was, at this point in the story, the last person, or one of the last people, to have cell phone contact with Vern. And we left off in part 1 where the police were interrogating Adriana about why, when, and where she might have met Vern.
Well, and I was going to remind our audience that we had talked about Daniel Blizzard.
Daniel Blizzard.
Who had wanted to buy Vern's company as Vern was going to retire, just to kind of get everyone back up to speed with some characters.
Right. Daniel had attempted to purchase the business, the brokerage Aspen Realty, from Vern back in 2008. The deal went sour. Fast forward 2013. Here we are in an interrogation room.
Yes.
And the police are asking Adriana the questions that, frankly, they know the answer to. Your cell phone pinged in Cowiche, which is where Vern Holbrook was found in a listing that he had. You had phone calls back and forth with him that same day. Tell us what's going on. And slowly, kind of, as the conversation continues, they start to break her down a little bit. We're going to start to get some more truth to the story here.
Well, and our audience probably doesn't know this, but Adriana is 23.
23 years old with 3 children.
Yeah. So she's, I mean, 3 kids alone, you can crack pretty easy. Just, how much sleep do you have when you have 3 kids? Not a lot, you know? You know,
That's true.
feed
She was
them
probably
a
tired.
snack and a nap, and they'll
Mhm.
probably be like, "I'll tell you whatever you wanna know."
Yeah, she was
And I
probably exhausted, but
But at
riddled with guilt.
23, yeah, at 23, she's very young, mostly inexperienced as far as, like, life experience goes, but yeah, so
So she's being questioned here. And at the same time as the police are trying to break down this information with Adriana, an investigation is continuing. And all while this is going on, Vern is still in
clinging to life.
yep, clinging to life in hospitals. He's actually been moved from hospital to hospital a few times to go to different types of care, hospitals that specialize in the care that he needed at that time.
And trauma.
Yeah.
Well, and the police are also asking the family, "Do you know anybody? Do you know anybody who would hurt Vern? Do you know
Mhm.
anybody that was upset with him? Has he received any threats?" And nobody really could pinpoint anybody except for one of Vern's sons, Chad, was kind of like, "Well, I do have an ex-wife."
Yeah, don't we all? Like, I have an ex that seems to be kind of troublesome. And actually, the police start to find out at this time that the ex wife that Chad is mentioning, Jill Taylor, is actually connected to Daniel Blizzard.
She's the current girlfriend, or on again, off again, of Daniel Blizzard, but also Vern held still a relationship with his former daughter-in-law because she was under supervised visits with their 3 kids, and Vern was the one that would be the supervisor of the visits when she wanted to spend time, or it was her time allotted to spend time with the kids.
Right. And as Adriana spills out the story, which we'll kind of touch back to her kind of confession, if you will, as the story moves along. But just to start tying in the other pieces here, it's now connected that Daniel Blizzard and Jill Taylor have had a relationship, like you said, off again, on again. It's unclear kind of when that relationship ended. But this relationship was discovered by Vern, who was heartbroken, his family said at that point, just heartbroken because it felt like such a betrayal. I mean, this agent, Daniel Blizzard, if you guys remember back to part one, he had attempted to purchase Aspen Realty, and he had agreed to a deal that he would purchase the brokerage from Vern on a payment plan over a certain period of time. And as a part of that plan, Vern would stay on as a consultant and help the business transition.
Yeah.
And about 3 payments in, Daniel stopped paying.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but Daniel said, "You don't have to just take my word for it. I'll bring on my 2 brothers so you'll know that, there's 3 of us that are kind of running this business."
Exactly. And so Vern even gave Daniel time after that to kind of make up for it. I mean, it was, I think, even up to a year later that Vern finally said, "I'm taking this business back. The deal's dead. You haven't made payments. This is over." Right?
Yeah, I think they had missed payments for over a year.
Yeah.
Before
It was a
Vern
long
was
time.
like, "Okay, this is not working out."
So obviously, this relationship is very soured. But at this point, we're going to discover something even more deep and dark here, which is that a part of this deal, as a part of this transaction where Daniel Blizzard and his brothers were going to purchase the brokerage, Daniel felt like it was of some concern that Vern was an older gentleman. And he said to Vern, "I'll buy this business, but only if it comes attached with a life insurance policy on you."
So this is where Sarah and I's research varies a little bit.
It does?
It
That's news
does.
to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is the research that I was able to come across was that Daniel pitched the idea of the insurance policy because a lot of the valuation of the company was because of Vern and his name.
Yeah, of course.
And it's not uncommon for businesses, especially businesses that are built from the ground up, that don't have a lot of like tangible assets, to have like name, reputation. Like that's the value. That's where the valuation of a company comes from.
Right.
And so Daniel was like, "Hey, I'm going to put a policy in your name because if something happens during this transition period, we're going to need a way to kind of influx cash because all of a sudden, if you're gone, the valuation of the company goes away.
Correct.
And so Vern agreed, not understanding, which is, we had talked about this briefly yesterday, just in our offices, about how life insurance policies work. So if you are the one that, like, say I take out a life insurance on Sarah and Sarah wants to cancel that policy with the insurance company, if I'm the one that's making the payments, the insurance company will not cancel the policy because they're getting paid.
Yeah. And at least in this, and life insurance is terrifying, right? If you are a true crime fan or listen to these types of stories, immediately when the words life insurance are brought up, you know exactly where the story's going.
Or you think you do. Like, it's not.
Yeah, sure. You think you do. It's 90% of the time, Amy. When it's brought up in the story, it's a key player. But actually, in this specific instance, this type of policy is called a key man policy. And you're right, it's not unusual for businesses to have a policy on the key man.
Yeah.
Because the name is tied to the business directly. So that part isn't necessarily unusual. The policy was for $1.58 million.
Yeah.
So it's a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
And Vern was okay with it at the time, although it was noted by his family that, like, he was a little unsure about it, but understood the relevance, and at this point, remember, the relationship with Daniel was still good.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking 2008 time period. So, Vern was in his early 70s and that policy must have been so expensive.
It was. And you could actually see, I think it's on Dateline if you watch some of the footage. I could be wrong, but all of my sources are in the show notes. They show the insurance policy highlighted, and it was well over $3,000 a month.
I was going to say,
for that policy,
because insurance,
it's all risk.
Yeah, they value on risk, and you've got a 70s, mid 70s man, like, yeah, like the chances of him dying are highly greater than someone who's 23.
Sure, of course. So the payments were high. The policy amount is high. We were talking about life insurance yesterday, like you said, in the office.
Yeah.
And I was going off about the fact, it just blows my mind that the person who's the subject of the policy has no control of it if they're not the ones paying the premium.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that applies to, I don't know if that applies to, like, certain types of policies or not. If someone took out a policy on me, oh my gosh, like, it's scary to even think about that you have no control over someone else wanting to cash out on your death. There are plenty of scenarios in which it makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah.
Honestly, it does. And even in a business sense, this type of policy, key man policy, makes sense. But there was a lot of feeling around it and concern around it because the business relationship soured so quickly.
Yeah.
So remember, Daniel only made about 3 payments. It's 2, in some sources it's 2 payments, then missed the third. In some sources, they just say 3. So either way, he only made a few payments and stopped paying.
To Vern, not to the policy.
To Vern. The policy was continuously paid on.
And then as Vern was getting ready to take back the company, he wanted that policy removed.
Mm-hmm. And Daniel refused, and the insurance company refused. Vern even reached out to them and said, take my name off of it. But the policy, the premium was being paid every month.
Yeah.
And it was being paid by Daniel Blizzard. And so the insurance company would not cancel the policy, which is scary. That's what's scary to me. The business relationship soured, right? So you're no longer the key man to this key man.
Yeah, but I mean, it wasn't like someone took out an insurance policy and then, like, 2 months later they're dead. Like, this is 5 years.
And that's why there were such hard feelings, though. So Vern had even approached Daniel and said, please cancel this. And Daniel did not. And Vern said, how about instead of making those premium payments, you pay me for the brokerage you're supposed to buy? There's no point in paying a key man policy without owning the business, right? Like, he was trying to get Daniel to realize that don't like, make the payments to the company that you agreed to buy first.
Yeah.
Because you had the money. The money for the premium was more than it was for the payment to Vern. And so obviously that relationship is going to be very tense. There is no relationship anymore. We'll just say it like that. And so when the detectives are connecting these dots, that Jill is now connected to Daniel Blizzard, we have blaring red lights and sirens because it's known that Vern had a very, very tumultuous relationship. Like, I was very angry at Daniel Blizzard, rightfully so. And so Vern had found out that Jill was seeing Daniel previous to his attack in May and was deeply betrayed by that. When Jill and Chad divorced, Vern felt like it was important to still help Jill stay on her feet and provide for the kids. And like you said, he was the supervisory grandparent when they had visits that needed to be supervised by an adult. And so he was staying involved in the kid's life and wanted Jill to be able to be a good mom to her kids. And so Vern was deeply betrayed by the fact that Jill was in a relationship with Daniel.
Yeah, and the family comes out and says how generous Vern was to Jill, you know, especially since the relationship had soured with Jill and her ex-husband Chad.
Right.
And Jill in interviews says that it was overstated, his support, but regardless, like, Vern has a history of being a nice guy.
All the way back to your grandpa.
Yeah.
You knew him at 70 years ago, you know, at this point, 80 years ago. And Jill does say, we'll get to Jill in a minute. Let me just, Jill, I'll get to Jill in just a hot minute here. But Jill does say on the Dateline interview that, well, I paid him back for every dollar. It wasn't free. He didn't, you know, I paid him back. And if that's all true and whatever, good for you, girl, whatever. But the reality is she's tied into the story, and now the detectives need to know why.
Yeah.
So looping back to Adriana, who's sitting in the interrogation room being questioned, she brings up another player in our story, which is her boyfriend named Luis Gomez. And his last name is hyphenated. It's Gomez Monges from for the way I read it. However, in my source material, he was referenced as Luis Gomez.
Okay.
So we just need to know Luis. So Luis is Adriana's boyfriend. He's only 26 years old.
No.
On our board here that we wrote to help us have notes, there's a note about 26 years, and I assumed it was age. Okay, well, Adriana's 23, and Luis is a piece of crap. So either way, no matter how old he is, he's now brought into this story. Remember, we did note that Adriana has 3 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So detectives are now finding out, and they go back and pull surveillance footage from the motel, Sunshine Motel, where Adriana was living, and they do in fact see Luis, Adriana, and her 3 kids leave the house, or the motel, and get into a vehicle right at the time window block, right before they would have gotten to Cowichee.
Yeah. Well, they saw.
So they're all together.
Yeah. They saw 2 properties that day.
Okay.
I don't know if I spoiled anything.
No, I mean, you didn't spoil anything. The feature of the story is obviously like this, you know, the final house, but I know that he did have 2 listings to show.
Yeah.
I didn't know at what point in the day
they saw the first one and then drove to the second one.
So the police now know these were the last people seen with Vern before his attack. Like, it's obvious what's happening at this point, right? They were somehow involved. So as the police are working her through this interview, they actually get her to break down. And what she says is that she was in the home with Luis, and she walked out of the room and heard a thump, and then went out to the car with her kids, and Luis came out a few minutes later.
Okay,
this is her story.
This is the thing.
Hold on. I wasn't there. You know that, right? This is Adriana's telling.
I know, but pause for a second.
Okay.
I about lost my mind.
Yeah, I could tell.
When I found out that a mom of 3 children, they're house shopping. They go, there's this cute little 78-year-old man at the time showing them houses. The kids are staying in the car at the first showing and the second showing, so the kids aren't like running everywhere. But She walks out of the room and hears a thud. Her children are in the car.
Mm-hmm.
So you're with a mad person
Mm-hmm.
who will attack a 78-year-old person, and you have 3 kids in the car.
Mm-hmm.
Do you not start the car or call the police? Like, do something. Like,
100%.
that is what a regular person does.
And you know what? We'll start to find out a little bit here. Adriana actually has a record herself, a criminal record, some minor charges. And she also kind of has some ties into the drug community, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so just to point out, like overall, situationally, environmentally, this is not a good situation,
She's
right?
not making the best choice.
She's not making great choices for her children. In the Dateline interview, Josh Mankiewicz, who is featured in this episode, says straight to I think it's the detective, he goes, "Have you ever heard of a woman bringing her children to a murder?" And they were like, "No, never."
Yeah.
But in fact, at this time, we know because she's told us that Louise is involved in the death, and yes, her children were present.
Oh, my God.
Horrific. Absolutely horrific. So little regard for life, for the life that they took and the life of the people around them. Absolutely.
You know how scarring that would be? I can't get off of it. I mean, I'm sure psychologists would seriously deep dive into that back trauma, but
it's horrific. I mean, in so many ways, right? It's just, like you were saying, not good decisions being made, very selfish decisions. And now the detectives need to figure out what was the motivation. Why? How is this all tied together? We have these key players. It's starting to form here. We have a $1.58 million life insurance policy on the line. But who is who? How is Adriana and Luis tied at all to Vern Holbrook?
yeah.
Well, Adriana mentions that she knows Jill Taylor.
Yeah, through drugs.
Yes, that is, yeah. She says that she knows Daniel Blizzard and Jill Taylor through each other, basically, right? Like she knows them as a couple. I met Daniel through Jill. And it had been traced back that Jill and Adriana met at a party in which methamphetamines were being used. Now, there's nothing else on that I found in any material, so I can't comment any further on drug history or usage. And frankly, like it doesn't play into it because you're both terrible people. Regardless of what you did, like at a party, you're both terrible people. I'm just saying we don't find anything else about kind of
Yeah,
their
and our
history.
audience will know why we're so hard on these 2 women.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Regardless of what
later down in the storyline.
Yeah. Regardless of kind of your history together, you're both awful people. Sorry, I know Jill's out there probably listening, but I don't really care. So we're both mad at different people right now. But again, they're trying to tie all the pieces together, and turns out Adriana knows Jill. Jill knows Daniel. Daniel and Jill had a relationship. Jill was Vern's ex-daughter-in-law. What is all happening here? Let's get down to it. Adriana confesses that Daniel had offered to pay Adriana $10,000 plus a $2,000 bonus to kill Vern Holbrook. And he didn't care how it was done. He just said $10,000 plus a $2,000 bonus after the deed is done.
So Daniel has a
$1.58 million life insurance policy. Yep.
And he wants Vern killed for 10 grand.
12 grand with the bonus.
Well, yeah.
It's like a tip, a murder tip. It's awful. I know. I'm just saying, greed, there's no other word to assign to Daniel Blizzard than greed. Greedy, horrific. So Adriana isn't going to execute this murder on her own, so of course she's going to get her boyfriend, Luis Gomez, involved. And she says to the detectives that her motivation, the reason why she went forward with it, even though she knew it was awful and knew it was wrong, was that Luis was about to be deported. And if they could get enough money, they could move to Texas and somehow avoid this, whatever. So completely selfishly motivated, completely selfishly driven.
Did they have intent to kill, or were they just going to scam Daniel? Like, oh, sure, well...
You know what? That's a great question. So if you go back and look at the material in which she's interviewed, and neither of these criminals... Now, I'm going to say this delicately because I want my true point to come out and not the way that it might sound, but hear me out. People in these types of positions who accept a sum of money that is meaningless to most people in order to take a human life are probably not the best decision makers with the best skill sets for, executing things that would require planning. Okay. I'm trying to say it like appropriately, but obviously not making great decisions, right? Because there's cell phone traces. They're all easily tied together. The detectives break this down with Adriana in one interview.
Yeah.
The phone is traced. Now, Adriana says that they destroyed the phone.
2 or 3 days after
It all happens
attack.
very quickly.
Yeah, they stupid criminals, I guess.
That's what I'm getting at is
Yeah.
the stupid criminals who have no idea what they're doing, making bad decisions, and at the same time, stay stupid. People who do things like this deserve to be caught, and so I'm glad that they were. But I don't think that there was a lot of... I don't think there was the ability or the knowledge to be like, hey, let's scam him for money, especially since Daniel promised a bonus.
Yeah. Well, and I just didn't know. I didn't know, one, if the bonus was a surprise later.
No.
And two, if, it was sure, you can pay us up front, we'll get the deed done, and really have no intent because they could use that money to then leave. How is Danielle going to find them if they leave? So maybe there wasn't really an intent, in someone's mind to kind of, justify not... Most people, if you're contacted by someone and will say, hey, will you kill my former business partner?
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, red flags are going off. You're going to go to the police. You're going to call someone. You're going to talk to a lawyer at least and just be like, hey, what's the best way to handle this information?
Well, interestingly enough, this wasn't the only potential attempt on Vern's life. So now we're going to loop in Ms. Jill Taylor. This lady is here and being interviewed and talking to us, and she has quite the self-defense story. However, she does have a friend, or had a friend, I'll say. They're probably not friends anymore, whose name is Nikki Vargas, and she comes forward to the police and says, straight up, Jill told me several times that she wanted to poison Vern. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. This lady, she uses a different word, this lady has been trying to kill him for a while.
Which is so weird because Vern is the only reason why she is right now able to see her kids as far as supervised visits, because he's the liaison between his son and her.
And that's Jill's defense. Jill says outwardly, I had no reason to kill him. He was good to me. I paid him back. But, there was no reason for me to want to be involved in this. Daniel set me up. Daniel dragged me into this. I have nothing to do with this.
Yeah, I do remember the interview where she says, I don't want to be portrayed as a victim. You're using that word, not me.
Yeah, that was a self-saving statement because that is in the Dateline interview. And she says right to Josh Mankiewicz, she says, at some point, Daniel handed her a water bottle with poison in it and said, go and kill Vern. And she says, this is her story straight up. Amy's looking at me like I'm nuts. Straight up, she says, I just dumped it out and threw it away. Well, why would you do that? Why didn't you call the police? And she said, why would I? Where I come from, you don't call the police just because someone tells you to do something. So it's this weird story that she's spinning that's kind of
Sarah.
She's trying to defend herself, but she's doing it by exposing that she's still a terrible human.
Sarah.
She says that outright. And you were asleep during that part of the Dateline episode.
Well, I was doing other research.
It was all the way at the end.
Yeah. No, so this is the thing. My question.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask a question.
Okay.
You're dating.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a relationship. You have an ex-father-in-law. Your current boyfriend hands you a bottle of poison or whatever and says, hey, I have an idea. Why don't you go kill your ex-father-in-law? Sarah, you have 3 children.
Yeah.
You have a psychotic boyfriend who's giving you, if her story is true, giving her poison.
Yep.
And saying, hey, listen, wouldn't you be in your head okay, I've got to get out of this relationship. How many times has he tried to poison me? I had the stomach flu a couple, 3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Violent. Threw up for days.
Yeah.
And I asked my husband if he was microdosing me because I was like, just get it over with.
We live in paranoia.
Just kill me now. He is shocked to death that
Yeah.
I even would suspect that he would poison me.
Is he? We live in constant awareness that our time could be coming at any moment. But I hate to break it to you, Jill doesn't get a whole lot better throughout the rest of the story. So
I'm just saying, like,
either
you as a regular person would be like, okay, I've got to get out of this relationship. It's a
100%.
danger to me. It's a danger to my kids. It's a danger to everybody.
Well, none of these people are making good decisions for children involved. Let's just say that. And the only thing that I can think of course, I don't know any of these people. I'm only watching the source material that I have. But my guess, my answer to you would be Jill knew like $1.58 million minus $12,000 was on the line. That's enough money, some people believe, to live the rest of your life, to run away, to win all of the court cases against her.
Yeah.
If there were any. If she has supervisory visits with her children only, that's obviously a very tough legal position for a mother to be in, whether it's earned or not. But you're obviously only able to be around your children with another adult. Like that's heartbreaking to a mother with a good heart and with good intent. So my guess would be that $1.58 million was such a lucrative price tag that Vern was an easy shot. I'm not saying it's anywhere near reasonable. I'm saying that's the only tie I can
I guess
I can think of.
I guess we try to do the analysis paralysis of it.
We do.
Trying to make sense of murder when murder doesn't really make sense.
Well, and if you look back at it, though, Daniel Blizzard, he took out that policy as a part of the purchase in 2008.
It's 5 years.
Right. He never stopped paying on that policy, which means to me, he knew he was getting paid.
At some point.
He knew at some point Vern was going to pass away. But maybe Jill wanted to expedite that death in order to get the money now.
Well, and you had mentioned that it was like, what, $3,000?
Somewhere, yep.
So for 5 years, that's $180,000.
Yeah, they're in it, or Daniel's in the policy, a lot of money. So he's going to hang on and ride this out. It's very possible that Jill was the factor that decided to expedite that. I don't know that. That's speculation. This is all alleged that we're talking about, but that makes sense. So here we are. Everyone's names have been brought up, and the police, unfortunately, or the prosecutors, I guess, realize at this point that they have to have somebody testify against somebody else. You have 4 players here. Someone was involved in some way. Adriana is saying it wasn't her, but she was there. Luis is not saying anything, although when they get to trial, he does try and blame it on Adriana. Daniel is saying he had nothing to do with it. Jill is saying Daniel's dragging her into this. It's a mess. So as we're preparing the legal case and we're going to go to trial, right? Vern Holbrook actually passes away 7, almost 8 months after his injuries.
Yeah. And what is sad about the whole thing, so all of these guys have been being held for attempted murder and all of these things. But when Vern dies, there is obviously pending an autopsy to prove that he died in direct relation to the attack that he sustained 8 months prior.
And he had, like you said, he had sustained some severe brain trauma during that attack, which was the constant thread throughout the whole, 7, almost 8 month period. And I was said in one source that his family was actually able to spend some time with him, take him home on Christmas and provide like some hospice type care for him for a little while to spend some time together and then take him back to the hospital.
He died in hospice care.
He went back. Yeah, he went back to care. But the family, I think the reason they're saying that is tried to make the most of the time they had with him, realizing that the odds of him at least living a regular, normal life again were very low.
To all of his family, they had told officers and everything that Vern died that day of the attack.
He
never regained consciousness. He lived in this vegetative state, clinging to life until he passed from his injuries.
Right. Which is tragic in its own way, right? Like, I'm sure the family loves and appreciates the time that they could spend with him, like his human form still, but that has to be very difficult. So Vern has now passed. This is officially a murder trial. And I'll just briefly go into it really quick, and then you can give us sentencing details. How's that?
Sure.
So we've got these 4 players. The prosecutors know they need someone to turn on someone in order to get this evidence all the way through because it's kind of unsure. The investigators, when they originally arrested Luis Goes, had found a bloody box cutter in his vehicle.
In the back of a car.
However, that did not turn out to be the murder weapon.
They weren't able to
That
get
wasn't
DNA
used.
off of.
And so they don't have the murder weapon. All they have is people pointing fingers at each other. So they make an arrangement with Adriana and Jill basically to flip.
Yeah, which irritates
Testify, not flip, testify.
it irritates the family because they were like, we want everyone involved,
Of course.
responsible. The police have come out and said, 1, we made this deal without talking to the family, but 2, the least evidence that we had against them was Jill. It was entire circumstantial evidence that they had to do with Jill. And so they felt like, if she turned as a witness to what she knew, that would bolster the case.
Right.
Because she's the common link between Daniel, Adriana, and Luis.
Right. And in Daniel's trial, he points it, and everyone else says, I honestly had nothing to do with this. Yeah, I have the life insurance policy, but I had nothing to do with it. These guys, I was just a friend of Adriana. I was just helping her pay her bills, taking care of her kids. On the day of Vern's, we'll call it the day of his death, according to his family, right? May 25th, 2013. He had texted Adriana, hey, let's go shopping. And then surveillance footage is seen of him coming. She gets in the vehicle. Later, she texts him that shopping is done. There's these suspicious ties back to their connection that the police believe are the signals to each other.
Yeah.
However, Daniel's story in trial is, I'm just a nice guy. I'm just a good guy. I was taking care of my girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, whatever Jill was at that point. I was just taking care of her friend. No big deal.
Well, and what we haven't told our audience yet is Daniel was going into the Sunshine Motel and paying the weekly payments
Right.
for Adriana and her 3 kids
Right.
to stay at the hotel. He would go in there weekly and pay her bill.
Right. Likely just paying them off until they were ready to do this.
It was on surveillance.
It absolutely was. But again, in court, his story is, I'm just a nice guy. I'm just taking care of these people. Funny he has money for that, but couldn't pay his brokerage bill. Anyway, Jill's story is she had nothing to do with this. Daniel obviously has to be the killer because he gave her poison at one point. She threw it out.
Yeah.
Not her
Daniel
fault.
set her up to
Yep.
be this bad guy.
Adriana doesn't really have much to say in her defense, except that Luis was the one who actually committed the violent act. And then Luis, in true form, nice fashion, blames it on Adriana. Adriana, this 23-year-old woman with a drug history, is the one who perpetrated this violent attack on a 78-year-old man. At the time he passed when he was 79, we've clarified, on this gentleman, and slit his throat and then walked away. She's savage.
Well, and in the court docs, you can see that her story is that he hit Vern over the head, beat him with his fists before he slit his throat, which didn't get his carotid artery and immediately have him bleed out. But Luis' version is that Adriana was the one that hit Vern over the head and then stomped on Vern. And then at one point, Adriana either changes her story because the medical professionals, like, the injuries to Vern aren't consistent with a beating with fists. And so then she's like, well, maybe it was a rock that was then thrown out and just different things like that. But regardless, like, the family never gets the full closure of what really happened.
The truth. Yeah. Yeah. Which is really unfortunate. And to disappoint you even a little bit more, when it comes down to sentencing, Daniel Blizzard is found guilty of the crime of first-degree murder. He's sentenced to 37 years in prison. Luis Gomez Monges is found guilty as well. And he is, for some reason, only sentenced to 26 years in prison, which the family is disappointed about both of these sentences.
Yeah,
Rightfully so.
They wanted a life sentence without parole.
You took a life?
Yeah.
You give your life. To take it one step further, Adriana Mendez received a reduced sentence with time served, and she left the courthouse that day.
Yeah, so Adriana basically sat in jail for 15 months, and she was given credit for time served, but just based on the fact, and I can't remember her charge specifically right now off the top of my head, but it was like it had to do with her children being at the scene is what she was kind of charged with for that 15 months.
I mean, the information's there. All the court documents are there. There's a lot to go through because there's 4 players in this one case, but you can definitely sort through all the legalities of it. And then Jill Taylor also walks free that day. She received credit also because she had spent some time in jail. And so both of these women are back out living a regular, normal life. Vern Holbrook's life was taken too soon. He was obviously a healthy, engaged, outgoing 78-year-old man who was still living a full life. And his life was taken over greed. Really, that's all it comes down to. Greed on on all 4 of their parts. But, Daniel Blizzard is the root of this story. And so may he rot. 37 years is definitely not enough. But that is kind of from start to finish the story of the tragic death of the beloved real estate broker, Vern Holbrook.
So just as an update for our audience, they have both filed appeals, Daniel and Louise, and the appeals process takes a long time, and you can have years of multiple appeals. There was allegations on Daniel's attorney part that the prosecutor may have made like prosecutorial misconduct because at the time of his pretrial hearings, the prosecutor had accused the judge of bias because it seemed from their defense that the judge had given a lot of stuff towards Daniel and not towards in favor of the prosecution. And then they didn't file the correct paperwork in the correct order. So the judge said, I will not recuse myself, but if you want to go through the correct process. Then the DA's office ended up retracting that. And so then Daniel's lawyer came in and said, well, wait, you made this outlandish claim. Then you kind of backed it up and didn't actually fill out the paperwork. So my client is, his rights were in jeopardy. And now we have prosecutorial misconduct to try to, with this judge or whatever. And all of that ended up getting waived. His attorney also tried to jump on that same bandwagon that in essence, it was the same evidence. And if they're doing this in that case, then it would have harmed his case as well. And anyway, it was just, it's the documents are extensive and it's a lot of reading, but
I have a suggestion. I have a quick suggestion.
Yeah.
Let's give him what he wants. Prosecutorial misconduct. Okay. Scratch the trial. It was crap. We got to go back. We got to start over.
Well, this was all pre-trial.
No, I'm just saying. Yeah. And whatever he wants, right? Scrap it. New trial because there was misconduct. Let's send you back. You're still going to be found guilty. And we'll sentence you to, I don't know, 58 years this time instead of 26.
Yeah.
You know what? That would be my dream world, is if these people who try to appeal things that they are guilty of, although I get it, but
yeah, they try to take the one thing that, jury instructions, that was another thing. They misrepresented the jury instructions. And so when they try to get out of the technicality, when they have clearly been the one to do the crime, I can see
it's aggravating. Yeah.
But ultimately at the end of it, at the end of all the pages and pages and pages of court documents, their appeals are denied. And and their sentences are still holding.
There they sit. I hope it is a miserable 26 and 37 years for those two. But Amy, at the end, we always do our takeaways. So let's just briefly give each other our quick takeaways from this case as real estate agents is kind of our perspective on the agent themselves or the story themselves. It can be a real estate related takeaway or a crime related takeaway or both.
Yeah. So for me, I just sit there and think, here's this man, Vern, who has been in the industry for many, many years. He's very experienced. We use veteran as the term for someone who's experienced, right? So he knows what he's doing. He's in this area. He's showing houses to a young couple with 3 children. And how disarming that would be. He was probably blindsided in the attack. You know, they saw first house, it was
100%.
fine, and then they went to the second house, and that's where he was attacked. But just how when we go out and we observe our surroundings, how our surroundings could be misleading. You know, we hear that all the time in cases, you know, oh, Ted Bundy can't be a monster, he was good looking. You know, like there's just all of these stereotypes that we perceive as ourselves. So yeah, there's this young couple, 3 kids, they're coming on the showings. I'm an experienced agent, I'm older, but Vern was vulnerable because of a greedy ex-business partner.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, interestingly enough, a part of the reason why we started this podcast was because we were blown away as kind of true crime, followers. We like to listen to the material and understand it. And we were both fascinated by this cross section between real estate agents who are either murderers or murdered. And oftentimes when they are the victim, it is in a showing or a situation where they were kind of cornered or they were alone with a new client. That is a frequent storyline. You're going to hear that coming up all the time on our podcast. And so kind of the point, my takeaway really was in this scenario, because we've talked about it with other cases, like, don't go alone, take someone with you to a showing, don't go at night, like all of these other scenarios that have happened. But in all reality, Vern was communicating with someone that seemed perfectly safe. I think this is kind of what you were saying also, right?
Well, and it was in the middle of the day. Like it was like around noon.
Yeah.
11:30 or noon or whatever was his showing.
Right. A family with 3 children. They had communicated. It wasn't like, they had at least spoken on the phone. So, I mean, my takeaway really, I guess, in this particular instance is just do the best you can.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it like that, but I guess in a sense, like we're all exposed and vulnerable in one way or another in our lives. Our profession does add an element of that. And so you and I have different protections in place than Vern might have. Like I just said, I always take my husband with me, or I don't meet someone that I haven't spoken to on the phone or met in my office in person first, those types of things. But, in this scenario, really do the best you can and just, Vern was a good man who lived a good life and left a loving family behind. He did not deserve to be victimized in this way, but he died doing what he would have done anyway, which is meet a client. And so do the best you can to take care of yourself and be safe. So that is it. That story was so hard. It's heartbreaking. His family is interviewed and seen in all the material, and it's just heartbreaking. So our family goes out to our hearts go out to his family, excuse me. So sorry for their loss and grateful that we got the opportunity to tell his story.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, that wraps up another episode of Real Estate and Murder.
All right.
Hey, talk to you soon.